I was laying on the floor watching TV, and the argument was getting more and more heated, and I finally heard Dad's newspaper rustle, and he jumped out of his chair, and I turned over and looked to see what was going on, and he was about ready to backhand her, and she dared him, and he didn't.
I remember the first time Mom went out of town for a week or two, also working for the state. And Dad was home alone. For the first time, had been left behind. And I was managing a restaurant at nights, and he comes walking into the restaurant because he was lonely and depressed. It was the first time I ever heard my dad say he was depressed. And so Mom was gone. He was trying to think of one of his kids he could go visit. And everybody was busy, but he knew I was at work, so I was a captive audience. And that was the first time I realized that Dad won't make it without Mom.
My parents were trying to scratch out a little farm living near a town called St. Anne, Illinois. They're farmers, both of them. Their parents were farmers. There was like a one-room brick house on there with a lean-to built on the side of it. And that's where my early years were. And then we moved to Buckley, Illinois, to a bigger farm where my dad was farming. And that's where I grew up. Grew up doing that, yeah. And we had milk cows and pigs and horses, yeah. It was a traditional old-fashioned farm. In the 30s, almost a Depression-era farm.
Did your parents actually force you to work on the farm?
Oh, it wasn't forced. Everybody, the whole family worked, yeah. Oh, yeah, it just killed. I hated it. You had to slop the hogs twice a day, and we had 5-gallon buckets of feed, and here I was just a scrawny little runt. We had to carry one of those in each hand out to the hog trough, and farming
I've
was...
only seen those in movies, so...
Farming's a dawn to dusk job for the whole family, yeah.
Well, how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 2 brothers, yeah, I was the oldest.
Well, I was born in
GI
Fort Monroe, Virginia. My
GI
father
brat.
was stationed at Langley Air Force Base, Langley Field. They didn't have a hospital, so I was born at Fort Monroe, Virginia.
Okay.
So I'm a clam digger, a rebel. I think Florida and Illinois and Virginia were the only places that I was with them when they were stationed there. Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, yeah.
Yeah, I celebrated my 6th birthday in Puerto Rico. 6 months after World War II broke out. We were in Puerto Rico when World War II broke out. So, and that was kind of a scary time because there was all kinds of rumors, and there were subs in the area.
German subs
in the area near Puerto Rico. I wasn't with them when they were stationed in Oklahoma or South Carolina. I was living with my grandmother in Illinois, and that's where I did most of my growing up, was in Illinois. I have an older sister and half-sister, and I had an older half-brother who died after surgery when he was 36 years old. Blood clot developed, and he died of cerebral hemorrhage. And then I had a younger sister and a younger brother.
Do you know the story how they met?
I do not know the story of how. Wait, the Majestic. She worked at the ticket booth, I believe, at the box office at the Majestic Theater in Illinois.
But he'd go cruising in his car and coming past the Paxton movie theater from the street. In the box office, he saw this cute young girl.
This was a little town, about 3 or 4 blocks Main Street, and all the teenagers would just cruise, hang U-turns on each end, and cruise Main Street. And
Drag Main.
Yeah, and there was really nothing to see. There was no teenage hangouts or anything, except the theater was one of those old-fashioned ones with a glass cage that extended out into the sidewalk, and that's where she was. A 15-year-old girl, I think in a leather jacket, if I remember right. She just looked foxy to me. So I stopped and walked up to the cage and started talking to her.
And it was love at first sight. And I guess he just kept, as he does now, he kept sexually harassing her until they started dating, and the rest is history.
He took me home from work that night, and that was it,
That was it, yeah.
as far as I was concerned.
She was 15.
I started going to a lot of movies. She was 15,
And you were.
19.
And then,
But I took her home from work from then on, I think.
and on Saturday nights in town, there was a Oddfellows Hall up above Pool Hall, and they would have square dances there every Saturday night, and we'd attend the square dances.
That was the first date, was the square dance?
The first day was just taking her home from work, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then I think after that.
But
it
we
was-
dated for 3 years.
Yeah. Oh, we fought and spats quite often, and
Tooth and nail, screaming,
What kind of fights did you guys have? I mean, over what?
oh, everything, anything, any
I can't really
constant struggle
remember.
to see who's in charge.
He thinks he's in charge.
Yeah.
Earl spent a lot of time at our house, and I fixed him meals, and one time we were having lunch, and I fixed grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And we were sitting at the table across from each other, and he got up and come over and gave me such a nice, sweet, loving kiss. I thought, oh, how wonderful. And then he went back and sat down with half of my sandwich. So, and then you ought to tell him about the last piece of meat, too.
Go ahead.
No, that's your story.
Well, I can't even remember it.
Oh, yes, you can. We were having dinner with my parents. And I'm the kind of person that I save my best bite till last.
Last bite I take on the plate is the very best piece of meat. And my mom did the same thing. And she had one piece of meat left on the plate. And apparently we're having dinner at her parents' house. And Dad took his fork and reached over and took that last bite of meat and ate it. Didn't ask, just took it. And apparently, Mom went off.
That's my favorite piece.
And we were just dating at the time. This is before we were even engaged. And she really, really threw a fit. And her dad just sat back and laughed and laughed.
My dad said that Grandpa Van was laughing. I can picture that laugh. And he told Dad, it's not too late, Earl. And I don't remember which event happened first, but you would have thought that he wouldn't have done it a second time.
Well, one time when we were dating before he went in the service, he had a date with me on a Friday night.
Well, I was
And,
building silos, so we were out. These are farm silos, not rocket silos.
Yeah.
And we'd be out. The crew would be out building silos all week long, and we would try to be home on weekends. But sometimes, in order to finish one up on a Friday, you might have to stay on Saturday. So, and I had
He had a date with me on Friday night and a date with Charlene on Saturday night. And he called me. He couldn't make it for the Friday night date,
I didn't
but
get
he was
home.
back in time to go out with Charlene on Saturday night.
And she didn't know for sure what had happened, except she found out that I was out with Charlene on Saturday after skipping the Friday one, and so she thought that I was really a scumbag, I guess, at that point.
What'd you do when you
I don't know if she ever did
I was
believe.
very upset.
Yeah, oh, she
Yeah,
was.
I was very
And it
upset.
took a long time before she believed that I actually had to work late on Friday. Yeah,
And
I think she believes it now. One of the reasons I had to date two girls back then, I was dating Charlene, but she was a Nazarene, a strict Nazarene. She couldn't go dances. She couldn't go to movies. They didn't have TV. Roller skating. She could go roller skating. So anyhow, it was very restrictive. So I went with her on Friday night, and then I dated a real wild one on
Yeah.
Saturday night.
But it was a Friday night date that you missed with me.
Or the
for
other
a
way around,
Saturday night
maybe.
date with
Maybe the other way
Charlene.
around. Oh, yeah, and she couldn't go out on school nights either. Her parents didn't care just to get rid of her or whatever.
And then he still was seeing Charlene and me at the same time, and he wanted to go to
You have
Nashville.
to cover all your bases.
He wanted to go to Nashville to the Grand Ole Opry. And he asked Charlene to go with him. And Charlene says, no, she couldn't go. She says, why don't you ask that Barbara? Oh, he didn't want to do that. But he did anyway. So we went down to the Grand Ole Opry.
See, there was another thing. Her parents let us drive from Illinois to Nashville, Tennessee with another couple for an overnight stay. And here she was just a teeny bopper. And so they were, I don't know, they were either eager to get you out of the house or they were very, very tolerant.
Well, my mother was married when she was 15 the first time,
Yeah.
so she didn't think anything of it, I guess. Yeah, we had a few dates first when we got first acquainted. We had a few dates, and it wasn't too long after that that you did go in the service. And when you first came home, when you first came home, you drove by the house of all the girls you had known when you came back from basic. When you came back to Illinois from basic, you were driving by all the houses, and you drove by my house and honked, and I came out and we talked. And it was shortly after that we were.
An item, huh?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Charlene dumped me, I suppose.
Yeah.
I was stationed at Chanute Air Force Base, and they had a curfew. If you didn't get back on the base by 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or whatever, the gates shut and you couldn't get back in. And their house was, pretty close to the base, and we were going together anyway. So if it run past the curfew, I just stayed at her house instead of going back to the base. So I spent a lot of time there, ate a lot of meals there. They kind of adopted me way before we ever officially got engaged.
And what was their impression of you when they first met you?
The parents, they thought I was a mousy little guy. What in the world is she dating him for?
Grandma Bonnie's reaction was, maybe it was after they were engaged, but she called him that mousy little guy. That mousy little guy. My dad.
Yeah. And I was 135 pounds. I think I was not in the Air Force then. I think when I enlisted in the Air Force, because her dad was a career man, I think that changed their attitude. They thought, if he's going to be a career Air Force man, he'll be all right.
And we were out one night and came home and parked in the driveway of my parents' house. And he said something to the effect that, you could get serious, couldn't you? And I said, yes. And he says, I'm sorry, I could never get serious about you. And I said, well, I don't want to see you anymore.
I think in Dad's mind at 19, he thought he didn't want to be tied down, and so I think that he dated Mom primarily, from my understanding, and then this other redhead girl, and then there might have been a couple other little girls that he flirted with or whatever, but when Mom put her foot down, that was it. He just didn't know he loved her that much yet.
Really? You said
Yeah,
that
reverse psychology, and it worked.
And about 2 weeks later, he told me he thought he could get serious too, so.
You mean you planned that out by saying that?
No, I didn't really. But it would have been smart, I suppose, wouldn't it? Yeah. So then I gave her an engagement ring at Christmas time, so I avoided having to buy a Christmas present that way. She was in home ec as a senior class, and her project was making her own wedding dress, which she did. Turned out pretty neat.
We had a fashion show at
At
the end
school.
of the year, and all of the things that the girls had made in the during that year, they were part of the fashion show, and my wedding gown was the highlight of the fashion show.
And at graduation, whenever they give out the awards, what is that, commencement or whenever they do that?
That was at the
She got the home ec award for the year.
Outstanding Student in Home Economics 3.
Yeah. So then she turned 18 on the
9th of May.
9th of May. She
in-
graduated from high school,
On the 26th of May
and we got married on the 28th of May. Yeah, so that May
In-
was a busy, busy time for her.
in
Can you describe
1954.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
That was in 1954.
Has been shown to hinder this marriage, I ask you, Earl Frank Renken, wilt thou have Barbara Lee Van Ostrand, here present, to be thy wedded wife, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honor her, and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others, keep thee only unto her, so long as ye both shall live? Then answer, I will. And now I ask you, Barbara, wilt thou have Earl here present to be thy wedded husband, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love him, comfort him, honor and obey him, and keep him in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others, keep thee only unto him, so long as ye both shall live? Then answer, I will. Who giveth this woman to be married to this?
So I think that having children is something that they both thought that would happen quickly, and it did.
Well, I don't know if they even got out of the church before I was conceived because it happened so fast. But, you know, the math all works. It was 9 months after they got married that I was born.
As our wedding approached, Earl made the comment that as soon as we got married, he was going to get me pregnant and put in for overseas. That's what happened. Only he didn't put in for overseas. That's just the way God heard him, I guess, and gave him his wish.
We were married 3 months when the Air Force sent me to Korea.
I know that when she thought that she was going into labor with Alan, it was Grandpa, her dad, that took her to the hospital and basically said, this is just a false alarm, it's not time yet, you're going to be fine. And she proceeded to have him, and Grandpa said, well, he's a cute little shit, isn't he? Because he told her it was just gas, it's just gas.
So she had her first kid and was raising him all by herself before I got back. But he was the cheapest of all our kids because he
Yes.
was born at the Air Force Hospital.
Yeah, born at a military hospital at Chunut Air Force Base.
And I don't recall, but I could have been several months old before my dad actually saw me.
He was born in February, and you didn't see him until October.
So I came home from a young kid from Korea, came home to family.
He had a dog when he was in Korea, I want to say. A military dog, a German Shepherd.
It was Christmas time, and he was trying to get home to family or something, and he just talked about he ended up on one base where everybody was gone. It was Christmas, everybody was gone, and he was in some barracks or something by himself with his mummy bag zipped up, only his nose sticking out of it, just thinking, this is miserable and I'm never doing this again. I want to go home.
But I do remember him saying at Christmas time, Thanksgiving or Christmas, I don't remember, but culling up with that dog because that was all he had. Because he wasn't home for the holiday, whichever holiday it was, I don't remember.
Between my assignment in Korea, they give you a vacation or leave, you know. So I had a 30-day leave, and so I went back to work for the silo company that I'd worked for before the Air Force,
Before me, wasn't it?
and they hired me for, you know, temporary. There again, I was a crew chief on a repair crew, because those silos once in a while have to be re-slurried on the inside to keep the acid from the silage eats through them. Or sometimes if they get hit by lightning, it busts out all the door frames because of the reinforcing rods in them, and you can replace those. And sometimes they'd put a roof on or a new roof or something. So here I had this crew. I think there was 3 of us with a pickup truck loaded with scaffolding and all the repair stuff, and we were going around repairing. And there again, we were out a week at a time, right?
I can't remember that.
Yeah, I think so. We were only home on weekends.
This is a different incident that I.
So we were coming home on Friday then after being out all week, and we were just within miles of being back to our home plant where they manufactured the silos and all the stuff. And there was an S curve. And the pickup trucks are probably overloaded. Besides the 3 of us in the cab, we had the whole back end loaded with all that stuff. And so as I approached the first half of the S curve and hit the brakes, they just went to the floor and there was nothing. So here we were going, highway speed, approaching a 90-degree turn, and no way of stopping. So I downshifted it as much as I could. In fact, tore the clutch out of it, downshifting it at those speeds. And where the S turn, where the 90-degree turn went, there was just a ditch. And we were just headed for that ditch. No seat belts in those days either. It just looked bad. However, we were going fast enough. We cleared that ditch with a big hoop-de-hoop, but we went over it instead of just diving in head-on crash. And it was a cornfield on the other side, and boy, here we were going through the cornfield, full-grown corn, taller than the truck. Just zap, 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 you know, knocking it down. And still no way to stop it until it just coasted to stop out in the middle of the field. And man, we all really took a deep breath there. I really took it. I was driving. And so we got out, and I guess the first thing you do is get mad.
And so this could have been a horrible tragedy. People, again, you know, if there would have been a vehicle, people could have been killed. So it was, you know, it was a miracle. No one was hurt. I can't imagine there was a lot of damage to the vehicle. And my dad, who's always had a bit of a temper, gets out, and instead of thanking God for the miracle, he gets out and he's cussing and spitting, and he slams the car door on his fingers. And yeah, so therein lies the moral. You can figure it out yourself.
So the only damage from the whole thing was me hurting my finger there. I was still in the service, in the fire department at Whiteman Air Force Base, but we had B-47 bombers there and KC-135 tankers. And that was in 1953 or 54. That was the...
At Whiteman? Honey, we were married in 54.
55, 56.
Yeah.
I was back from Korea. Yeah. And that was the Strategic Air Command's front line of defense. By refueling those planes in the air, they could hit any spot on the globe. And that was before the era of missiles or anything. So that was our long-range bomber. And so they would scramble those a couple times a year and have a big defense exercise. And they would pick some spot on the other side of the globe and have a fake bombing run. And refuel them in the air several times to get there. And then when they took off, they would take off a whole mass takeoff. The planes would be like a couple of them side by side, and then behind them, just in seconds behind them, would be another pair. And so by the time they come back from the round the world trip, they all needed fuel. They were low on gas. If they'd had any mechanical problems or anything, why it was getting critical by that time. And they would land the same way. They would land just seconds apart. And so it was essential to keep the runways clear. The fire department could come out, the crash rescue fire department would come out and stand by all along the airport, all along the runway during those landings. In case a lot of them come in with some kind of problems. And we were on the radios, and we could hear from the tower the ones that had, some light come on, said their landing gear wasn't locked or whatever it might be, or they were critical with gas or whatever. And so if with one came in that had a semi-emergency, as he touched down, the fire trucks would peel out and chase him down the runway, so they'd be on the scene, if something happened. I was in the fire truck that was in about the middle way of the runway, and peeled out to follow, and the fire truck quit. The engine just died. Here we sat in the middle of the runway, and with seconds behind is another plane coming down, and we could hear the tower talking to him, and it would have been a heck of a crash for that B-47 to hit that giant crash rescue fire truck right in the middle of the runway. And we didn't have enough handsets, microphones, for all the fire trucks. So different crew chiefs would steal a microphone, so he'd have one on his truck. Well, I ended up without a microphone in my truck, so I couldn't call the tower and say, we're in the middle of the runway. And we were just about to everybody just bail out and run like the devil for the edge of the runway, knowing there'd be a tremendous crash, because the landing lights, we could see the plane coming in. But I got out, and there was like a running board, and then steps to another running board. This is a big truck, and I was the crew chief of this truck. So I got out, and I popped the hood on the thing, which is almost a two-man job anyhow, a tremendous sized truck. And I don't know why I did it, why you thought, always when you have motor trouble, you look under the hood, right? I had no idea what I was going to do or what I was looking for. But the wire was out of the distributor. Very obvious. It had a big distributor on there. And I didn't even know if that wire was supposed to be the fire crews didn't do any of the mechanical work. That was another bunch of people. So we really had no occasion. The only time we ever raised that hood was to wipe down the engine, because we kept the whole thing where you could eat off of it. And so I saw the wire dangling. I poked it back in the top. It was the center one in the distributor. I poked it back in there, told the driver to try to start it, and it did. And we just got it started and just headed for the edge of the runway just in time as that B-47 landed. That was probably the closest call I ever had, yeah. I think we probably all got radios that worked after that.
The first house that we had, let's do that. The first house we had was a
Well, it was a trailer
was an
first.
8-foot wide, 21-foot long trailer.
It would be called a camping trailer nowadays, but that was a mobile home then. We were trailer trash.
It had a bathroom that had a sink and a shower and a stool, but you sat on the stool and could use the sink, and when you took your shower, you stood straddle the stool.
It was smaller than a phone booth, and it was the entire bathroom.
How long did you guys live in that trailer?
We lived in that for a couple years, and then we bought a piece of property in a little town called Loda. That's where we went to church, was in Loda, Illinois, at Lutheran Church. And it was a basement, just the basement.
It was a house that wasn't intended to be a basement house. They just, in the Midwest, houses have basements. And the basement was built, and there was a door sticking up out of the ground, and that's about all you saw. And my recollection is you go down the stairs, and really only 2 rooms. They're separated. They made more rooms by putting a curtain up, I think. But it was basically just 2 rooms, and we lived underground.
The people we bought that basement from, his intention was to put a house. That's just as far as he got, and he left the area and just sold it. And so we bought it with the intention also of putting a house on it. In fact, today there is a house on it, but we moved to this house in Paxton before we got around to putting a house on there. And it was on a couple acres.
No, it was, I think it was only on like a quarter of an acre, I think. That's quite a bit of property.
It had an out shed there for
It might have been a
storage,
little bigger. There might have been an acre.
and we had a pretty big garden.
Yeah.
Big yard, too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was almost rural. It was quite on the edge of town, so there was a lot of acreage all around us. And our neighbor was mowing one of the fields and stirred up a rabbit's nest.
That's when we were having our field plowed.
Yeah, see, we had way more than a quarter of an acre there. And so they plowed up this rabbit's nest, and we did. Some of them might have been killed.
The mother
Well,
was
the mother
killed.
was killed. We
and-
saved all the little baby rabbits.
And we raised most of them.
These are cottontails, just wild rabbits. And so we had the little outbuilding, the little shed out back. So we raised rabbits, but they are voracious eaters, and so we paid a lot more for feeding for those rabbits. I think there were 8 of them, weren't there?
6 or 8.
It cost a fortune to feed those little boogers, and we didn't think it was ever going to get big enough to butcher. But they finally did. We finally butchered, and we ate the rabbits, but boy, they were expensive. It had been a lot cheaper to buy rabbits.
They didn't taste any good.
Oh, they taste
They
great.
were-
Oh, yeah.
Wild rabbit is good.
We're
Cooked
from
properly.
Illinois. We hunted, small game. I was raised hunting rabbits and squirrels and pheasants. And she was, from the time she got married to me anyhow, she knew how to cook wild game. So yeah, we had eaten a lot of wild rabbits. That's why we knew they would be good, but we didn't realize how expensive it was to feed them. But the basement was just, it would flood.
Yeah.
I swung my feet out of bed one morning and I was knee-deep in water.
By the time Dennis came along, we were, Earl was out of the service. He was a civilian firefighter at Cheney Air Force Base. And I had had problems from the beginning of the pregnancy, but and fairly early on in the pregnancy, the doctor wanted to abort, but I couldn't do it. And he was born 7 weeks early.
So he is my perfect brother. He has a complete head of hair. He was always nice to me. He's just perfect.
He was the brother that I talked to the most when I was upset and distraught as a little girl. Because I was sure that he would have always understood and never teased or been unkind. And he was the perfect brother.
Dennis was born This one's still tough. I've got a brother I've never met yet. But I think Dennis was also born at Paxton Hospital, but he only lived a couple hours. They knew he wasn't going to make it.
He had spina bifida, I believe, very severe. He had clubbed limbs. I don't remember, it was like 2 hands and 1 foot or 2 feet and 1 hand, I'm not sure. It was like 3 clubbed limbs, so he wouldn't have really had use of them had he survived. I think that he lived like just 2 hours-ish. They did have the hospital chaplain come in, and he was baptized.
He lived an hour and 12 minutes. And he's buried in Illinois. And we recently were back there, and his headstone just said Dennis Renken.
When I was 18, I went back to Illinois for a family reunion, and we went out to see his tiny little headstone. It was just a little square headstone, one date, birth to death. And there was some weeds growing up around it because we had moved. We weren't living in Illinois anymore. We were out here in California, and so I picked them all away, and Skip, Grandma Mamie's son, was with us, and he'd gone over and picked a couple wildflowers to give to me to put there on Dennis's little headstone. And so it was a little more emotional than I thought it would be for me, just because I never met him.
And when we were back there in Illinois a year ago, we had a new marker made that gave his time of birth and time of death, and who his parents were. And we brought his old marker home with us, and we have it out
In the rose garden.
between our roses out and back.
And he wasn't meant to be. And then the doctors told Mom and Dad, for her depression of sadness over the whole thing, to just jump right on that horse and have another one. And that's when we got Gary.
So I was the only baby that was intended, worked at, tried for, and they spent 2 years trying. They probably over-tried, from what I understand. I believe Dad came home for lunch every day.
And Matt came out, Gary Matthew. He went by Gary and then Matthew, or Matt. He came out, and he didn't cry like the normal babies. He kind of screamed, and when the doctor had him up, he was peeing on everything. So that was kind of his attitude coming in. And that's kind of Gary.
From the stories that I remember Mom saying, out of all of us children that went to go have our, first set of shots and boosters, like normal babies, we would cry, and, it hurts. But all he did was, eh. That was it. Just a little sound. There was no crying. He was stubborn and on full throttle all the time. I remember Mom telling me about her giving him a hot dog to eat, and she told him specifically, do not take that hot dog out of the bun. And she continued to turn around and talk to her friend, whoever she was with, I'm not sure, and she turned around and looked, and there he is eating the hot dog, and the bun's doing this. He didn't take it out of the bun, but he also didn't eat the bun.
He was my most stubborn one, and has always been. All of the children were
He's
either...
going to see this,
That's good. All of our children were born either on the date that the doctor said they would be born, or no, they were all born earlier, a few days earlier than the projected date. But Gary Matthew waited until the date. He was the closest one to being late. And then Lori Lee was our first daughter, and Earl had thought he wanted all sons.
Mm-hmm.
But then came Lori. Lori, born, I don't know if she was born on Father's Day, but her birthday falls on Father's Day occasionally, so it was really close.
I don't know how many kids he really wanted, but he said he was content with all boys. And he had a boy, and then they had a boy who died, and then they had a boy, and then they finally had a girl, And that year he got his first, or that day, it was Father's Day too. I was born on Father's Day, his first girl, and he got his first gray hair. But he loved me, and he said he didn't care if the rest were all girls.
All the rest of them we'd planned, you know, a
We
dozen
planned
or so.
We planned a dozen or a baker's dozen. And then Paul Dean came along a couple years later. He was my biggest baby. He weighed 7.5, I think it was, or 7.7.
But after he was born, I think at about 3 months old, they started noticing and realizing that he was a little small for his size, or for his age, that he should have been beefier and there should have been more to him. And then at about closer to a year, if not a year, Mom had a friend question if he could even sit up on his own because he was still in a little car seat, because he was content and happy. And she said, I don't even know, because she's never really tried.
By the time he was a year old, he was losing weight. He'd gone up to over 15 pounds, but then he was dropping down and lost a couple of pounds in a couple of months, which isn't good for a
Brand new baby.
a brand new baby.
It seems like I remember stories of it being like, you know, we're concerned that he might not make it to 12. Like it was something.
And so we took him to the doctor, and they did some examining, and the doctor said, well, you know, we can't rule out an ulcer. And after further testing, that's what it turned out to be. We treated him for a couple years, well, for several months, and
He had to go on an ulcer diet.
He still wasn't really gaining any weight. He ate 5 times a day, and he had medicine before and after he ate. And every time I went past him, his little mouth flew up like a little bird because he thought he was going to get something shoved in it. But
He got to where he loved barium.
and doctor was just about ready to go in and do an exploratory operation to see if there was something more than the ulcer causing the problem. And he started to gain weight, a little bit of weight. And so we finally got him back on the right track. And then I got pregnant again, and I didn't say much of anything to anybody because, I mean, my goodness, so many children, I thought people would say things. But anyway, when I was about 5 weeks ahead of my due date, I started having some cramps and bleeding, and I thought, oh dear, I'm going to lose another baby, because that's the way it had started when I lost Dennis. And when I went to the clinic to see the doctor, he said, you're in labor, so I think you better go to the hospital.
And she panicked a little bit because the last time she went into labor early, she lost a child. So she went to the hospital very nervous, not knowing what was happening and why was this baby coming early.
This was before the time of X-rays, and they
Right, exactly. It was
Sonograms
yeah,
and so on.
before sonograms. Before they occasionally took X-rays, but they didn't take an X-ray this time.
They didn't have fathers in the delivery room, at least in that hospital, and maybe not in those days, period. But they had a big double door that was glass, and the father could stand there and watch the delivery room. So I was standing out there in the hallway, and I could hear.
She gave birth to a breech baby boy.
When the baby was born, the doctor says, I think there's another one.
I think there's another one in there.
I think there's another one.
Oh, I think there's another one.
I think there might be 2.
Hang on, I think there's another one.
And I probably hit the floor then, I'm not sure.
And she says that she sat up as straight as she could and looked him right in the eye and said, "What?"
This was a doctor that graduated a year ahead of me from high school, so I thought he was teasing me.
And she sat up as much as she could in the stirrups and said, "What?" And he's like, "No, no." And she laid back down and goes, yeah, there's another one.
There is another one, and out came my brother. So
And in that brief moment, in fact, she had 2 minutes to come to grips with the fact that her family just went from 4 to 6.
And so she had to scramble to get a second crib. She had to scramble to get a, second high chair, a second everything. She was completely unprepared for 2. So when she brought home the twins, she had, Paul at home, who was 1, Lori at home, who was roughly 2, Gary at home, who was roughly 3, and Alan at home, who was 6, 7 years old. Which that right there is an ad for volume.
It might have been at that time that she figured if they're going to start coming out in 2s, then we're done. So I was to have been the last child.
And then I had given away my last diapers and maternity clothes, and along came Lisa.
She was an oops. As a matter of fact, you remember when cereal boxes had, toys and stuff in them. One particular time, these little personalized license plates were in there, and we found a license plate that said oops. And it didn't take us 30 seconds to have that on her bedroom door.
Mom tried to sell her on the black market because she had had enough diapers and babies. She spent, I believe, Paul and the twins, all 3 were in diapers at the same time. And Paul was just out of diapers when Lisa came along, so she still had 3 in diapers.
She just housed a lot of kids. But they finally got another girl. And when Lisa, I was happy because a girl, I thought, was another girl, a playmate. So when they were bringing Lisa home and we were making our posters, welcome home, Mom and baby, I expected, I guess, Shirley Temple to come in the door. I thought it was going to be a little girl with curly blonde hair, and she brought this thing in.
She was an oops. They didn't plan her, and as a result, my oldest sister hates her guts to this day. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to actually stop telling stories and tell the real thing.
It was okay until it was always, Lori, go walk the baby. Lori changed the baby's diapers. And I felt it was because she was a girl, I had to do everything. Then I wish she was a boy. But of course I grew up and I know it was because I was the girl. I was taking care of them.
It wasn't really what they expected or hoped for or wanted. I remember hearing stories that Mom was just overwhelmed and tired. And there was a time when she kind of beat her on her own stomach, not wanting this last baby. And when it was born, it took her 3 days to hold her. That was the first diaper Dad changed. And she was born with infection-induced asthma. And then she had a pneumonia when she was born, so breathing was very difficult. So for those first few days, she had to be propped up in her sleep. Lisa, that was me. And it was about the 3rd day that Mom heard me choking through the night and gasping, and that's when she said her feet never touched the floor, just to go make sure that the baby was okay. And so she was over being overwhelmed. And then that was it. And then that was truly it. No more after that.
She's been a joy and a pain. But all of them were. There was a lot of joy with all of them and a lot of pain with all of them.
Still is.
Yeah. Just before Gary Matthew was born, then we bought the Brown house in Illinois. It was 3 lots on the corner, and years before we bought the house, my grandmother had helped the Browns convert the upstairs into an apartment for extra income for them. When we moved into the house, we kept the apartment and rented it out because at the time we moved in, we only had 2 children.
And then they kept having kids, so they quit renting out the upstairs and turned it into 3 more bedrooms. It had a basement too, but it was a tiny basement. It was not one you were going to live in. But there were shelves down there in that basement, and Mom would do pickles and stuff and store them down there. Everybody came into the house on the Taft Street side. I don't know how old I was when I realized that wasn't the front door. That's the side door. But you walked in the side door and you walked into the dining room, and then just past the dining room was the kitchen, and then the back door where you walked out the back door and you were outside. Well, one of the changes is they took that wall out and made a big kitchen out of it. Kitchen where we ate our meals, so kitchen, dining room combined. And then when we bought the property, there was a barn on the property. And Al Spray and probably a lot of the Case kids, but they disassembled the barn, used that material to build a 2-car garage and a utility room attached to the house. So now when you walked out the back door of the kitchen, you weren't walking outside, you were walking into the utility room, down about 3 steps, where there was a washer and a dryer that I don't think ever went one day without running. And a shower in the corner that didn't have doors or curtains. And then the door to the 2-car garage that they built. There's a little laundry chute built there so you could throw laundry down from the bedroom, and we used to play hide and seek. That was one of the hiding places.
We had a garden. We had a lot of fruit trees, so there was a lot of fresh fruit and stuff through the years. So this property went from a couple of old codgers that kept toys that came into their yard and kids were sort of afraid of, to a house that was full of kids. And we had a swing set in the backyard with a good-sized slide that Earl's mom had bought for the kids. We had a basketball hoop. We had a big tractor tire that was a big sandbox. And Earl came home from work one day, and I was standing at the kitchen sink and looking out into the yard. And I said, "Look out there." I says, "There's 9 kids out there. None of them are ours." But they were all enjoying the playground. And he came and looked, and he says, "There's 12 of them, and none of them are ours." But in the time that I told him and he looked, 3 more kids came.
My friends would talk back to their parents, and that was just not something that would ever, I don't think, cross any of our minds, especially not the older ones. We just didn't do it. It was a respect thing, being raised in the church, a fear of God, fear of parent, whatever. But, we would get spanked if we disobeyed or were disrespectful or whatever. And
I spent the first 13, 14, 15 years of my life hating my dad a number of times when I'm getting my rear whooped, which in the way I remember it, at least through the age of 12, 11, I don't think a day went by that I didn't get a whooping. That's the way I remember it. Apparently, they don't think it was that often.
so we had a lot of respect for Dad.
Renken, Estelle Costanza, Earl and Barbara Renken, tell it like it is, and they love each other dearly. They still hold hands after 56 years. But, they probably go at it a little bit almost every day. When we were kids, there was times Mom and Dad would be having one of their disagreements. I remember a number of times where we would be scared, and we'd be up in the room crying, thinking this is the end. Certainly more dramatic than it really was. But then next thing it'd be Mom and Dad and we'd be all hugging and crying, and everything would be all better. But I really doubt there was ever a time that it was iffy.
Illinois got back roads, country roads, and I really don't remember if this was a gravel road, but it wasn't the main road, it was a back road. And he had us all, so I don't know if it was after church, I don't really know why we were driving, and all means all at the time, I can't remember how many of us were in the car, but there were little kids in the car. And Mom had her knitting or crocheting, whatever she was doing, probably knitting because there were bigger needles. So she's, trying to do that to probably be distracted. And there's the noise from the kids. And I don't know how young they were, but so he's driving and he just keeps going faster and faster. And he thinks it's pretty funny because he hits 100 miles an hour. And like again, as the woman, as the mom, 100 miles an hour in a station wagon, and you didn't wear seatbelts then. And the kids are going, and she didn't say anything, and she had had enough, and the knitting needles all of a sudden snapped. And he just kind of looked at her, and then, this nervous laugh, and then he slowed down and was like, oops. And it's like, but he was just so young.
Dad had lived his whole life in Illinois, and all his brothers and mother and father, I mean, the family went back a couple generations. Mom was a military brat, so I don't know. She had lived in Illinois for most of her life.
We were surrounded by family there. Grandma Mamie was there, Grandpa Renken was there, Uncle Gail was there, Uncle Larry was there. Mom's best friend was there. So it was home for sure. And it was traditional. Mom was at home. Mom cared for the babies in the house and the grocery shopping and the cooking and the laundry. And Dad worked. Dad worked a couple jobs. Maybe even 3. 2 for sure, but he worked to support his family. So coming home, expecting a meal, and not really helping out with the kids much. He didn't change diapers or any of that.
I remember walking to school in the wintertime in Illinois. We'd walk to school, and if it was snowy when we came home, the memory I have, I know it didn't happen every day, but was, she'd have us go in and thaw out our hands in the sink, and then she'd have hot chocolate or something warm for us, and that was always nice.
I had just begun to get involved in community activities and groups and stuff, and because I had been a housewife and mother. Our youngest one was 4 years old. I knew there weren't going to be any more, so now I had a little bit of freedom.
But my mother's family, one by one, had migrated to California. So my mom's parents, both sisters, were in California, and we made family vacations 3 or 4 times to California. And so Dad liked California. But then my grandfather, my mom's dad, had terminal cancer.
He'd had the first round of cancer, and we weren't able to come out, I don't think then, but then we came out when he had the second round of it, and they said that they weren't even sure he was going to leave the hospital after the second round. It turned up in the liver and the lungs a little over 5 years later.
I know Mom and Dad went back to see him December. It was probably December of 1970 when he had taken a turn for the worse. And they came out to see him, and that's when Dad decided that December in California was a lot nicer than December in Illinois.
We left this beautiful California weather and went back home to snow.
And so when we had made that drive from the best to the worst, we just decided there was no reason there was no reason to live like that.
The way I heard it, he decided he wanted to get away from Illinois winters and move to California and get a house with a swimming pool and palm trees.
When we found out her dad had terminal cancer. We decided, and almost all of his grandchildren were in Illinois with us, so we decided that we'd rather live in California, but the weather and give them a chance to know their grandpa. And so right away we called a realtor to have him sell our house. We called, we told the kids not to tell anybody at school because I was afraid if my boss found out that I was moving, I'd just be fired, and I didn't want to lose my job. Now, she, of course, was a full-time homemaker, but we didn't know what we would run into when we moved to California, so she took a job as a waitress in a little restaurant there just to have, so she had some resume, so she'd have a little experience. We figured she could get a waitress job out here if we couldn't do anything else.
Which helped the family greatly financially, but as the 10-year-old daughter, I did miss having Mommy at home. That was hard.
I gave my boss a 30-day notice.
2 weeks, I think.
2 weeks, whatever the rule was, I guess.
I think
2
it was
weeks
2 weeks,
notice.
yeah.
But they surprised me. They were very, very supportive. They called the branch office here in Sacramento and to see if I could transfer and give me a lot of counseling. And there actually wasn't an opening at the time. They had one part-time opening, but that wouldn't have been enough.
And we took everything, we took all our belongings and put them on the front yard and hired an auctioneer.
Just good old-fashioned auctioneer selling everything we owned.
It's very common in the Midwest. It's like a farm sale. The auctioneer just walks down the row and just sells everything, auctions it off. Because it was 7 kids, 2 adults, and a dog to drive to California. We didn't have room to bring hardly anything. So we threw away all our clothes sold all our clothes except permanent press, which was a new deal in those days. It was a brand new thing, permanent press clothes. So we didn't bring any iron or ironing board, but we brought just permanent press clothes for all 9 of us.
I do know that Mom probably had a tougher time with the move than anybody. There was furniture that she had that she loved that we sold. We had a lot of stuff by moving the way we did that we left behind that I know both of them wish they still had, or at least at one time they wish they still had it. We had 3 drivers, but my dad didn't know what we were coming to, so he sold a 65 Ford Mustang. I always thought it was $300, but I've also heard $400, even if it was $500. It was a crime. The car was stolen from him.
There was a picture, I think this is how it went. I have a great grandmother that had taken a picture of this kitty out of a magazine and framed it, and I had that on my bedroom wall since I remember. And I think that was going, and one of my aunts, that was going in the sale, because everything was going in the sale. And she bought that and gave it to me so then I could have it with me. And it's still on my bedroom wall.
But we managed to pay off all our bills with the sale and stuff, all the loose ends, except the car we were driving. And we had everything packed up in the trailer. The kids were in the car and couldn't find Barb. So she must be in the house. I walked on in the house, which was a 5-bedroom house, and there was some pretty big rooms in there. So it was just an echo. And she didn't answer. I couldn't find her. I walked all around. I finally opened the closet into our bedroom, and there she sat in the floor of the closet in a fetal position, saying, "I'm not going." So she decided that the whole move was too traumatic, and it had been pretty traumatic, selling off all her stuff and quitting her. She belonged to the Junior Women's Club, and we belonged to the JCs, and it was kind of hard and really traumatic to give everything up. The kids handled it better than anybody, better than us, rather.
It was kind of traumatic. I had to tell everybody goodbye. I remember going around my bedroom and telling the walls goodbye and the closet goodbye, finding little pieces of probably just garbage, but you know, parts of the floor, you know, my mementos, and it was hard. And
I had finished my sophomore year in high school, so just got my driver's license. A lot of people have said leaving school at that point in time was probably tough, and it wasn't all that tough. I didn't feel like I had a bunch of close friends. I had one close friend, but I didn't fit in with either one of the groups, the farmers or the jocks. I wasn't either one. But moving was a big deal.
But my family cried when we left. My grandmother cried, my dad, my brother.
Yeah,
I don't know if I'd ever seen my brother cry except when I crippled him for one reason or another.
and his brother's never forgiven him to this day for picking up and moving.
Oh, no. He still really begrudges the fact that we left Illinois, left all of our relatives back there. Yeah. So anyhow, we finally got her in the car and headed west.
And so my dad did something that I've always been amazed by. And he was the sole breadwinner in the house because Mom was raising 7 kids. But he left his job, sold the house, and sold everything that didn't fit in a small or medium-sized U-Haul trailer. And he packed up his family of 9 and headed west in our station wagon. And yeah, I mean, he came out to California with no job lined up.
No home,
Only a high school education.
no property.
The only family out here couldn't house us.
I don't know if I could do something like that.
It's just a huge risk, a huge chance to take your 7 kids and go across country where you really didn't have anything set.
we drove out in, it seemed like it was 3 days. We just drove out straight. We loaded everything we had, everything we had left after the auction, which was really clothes, and the color TV, because the color TV was a new thing. That was a big thing. So it was the only piece of furniture I remember. And we put it all in the back of this U-Haul, and then the 7 kids, parents, and the dog all got in a station wagon and drove 3 days.
We didn't have hardly any money. So we drove until we couldn't drive anymore the first night. We pulled into a gas station that was closed for the night and just pulled in the driveway, and the kids all bailed out and slept on the ground.
In sleeping bags.
One stop we made between a gas station and a train track, and we just opened the back, we pulled our sleeping bags out, laid them on the ground.
And we just kicked back and slept in the car.
It was an old deserted gas station, I think.
I think it was just closed for the night, but
Oh,
it
it
might have
could've
been
been, it could've
deserted.
been.
Anyhow, it wasn't active.
As I remember it, trains coming by several times through the night, very loudly, and it was exciting and neat, but also not very restful.
And so when I couldn't sleep anymore, which you don't do very well, sleeping sitting up in a car, it's probably wee hours of the morning. So okay, everybody out of the pool. We're heading west again.
I was young enough that it was nothing but an adventure to me. I don't remember that I was afraid of it or missing anybody. I wasn't leaving. I was young enough to where you just kind of go with the flow.
By the second night, we were high up in the mountains, near Tahoe someplace, I suppose, and we stopped at a campground so we could all get a shower. And by the third night, we were at her parents' house. So here we are, 7 kids and a dog, no job. We pulled into her parents' driveway and said, here we are. I can't even imagine any of my kids doing that to me. But her parents just didn't seem to bat an eye. They
Nope.
put us up. They housed us and fed us. So so that's how we got to California.
When we got to California, obviously there's 9 of us. We can't, nobody can accommodate all 9 of us. So we spread out. Mom and Dad lived with Grandma and Grandpa, and then right across the street was Aunt Connie. Some of you stayed there. 2 houses down was Aunt Jean. Some of you stayed there. Matt and I stayed across town a little ways with Aunt Tommy.
I started looking for a job. And we started looking for a house. I guess the first thing we found was the house, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, over in Rio Linda, a guy had a rental unit next to their house, and it apparently had been empty for a while. It was all grown up in weeds and no screens on the windows, and the backyard was a pasture for his cow. But he rented it to us. Again, no job, no future. Some people won't rent to a dog or won't rent to kids, and we had both, plus no visible means of support. And he rented that to us anyway, just on faith, I guess.
$50 a month.
Yeah.
And then we found a house in Rio Linda that to us it had a swimming pool, which was the bottom of a silo filled with water, but we were happy.
We bought a bunch of this plastic screen, so we stapled screen or duct tape screens to the windows. And did we borrow a lawnmower?
I think we used their lawnmower.
Oh, we used
The
theirs
Ayers
maybe, and we
lawnmower.
mowed all that lawn, and it was all brown too. This was in June,
July
by that time, yeah. And but it started. Oh, we started watering it, and it turned green. We turned it into kind of a home. Her sister then worked for the phone company.
A younger sister, Jean.
She let all her friends know that her homeless sister from Illinois with a bunch of kids, a bunch of Okies, had immigrated to California, and they had nothing. So all her friends started donating furniture, washers, dryers, heaters,
Refrigerator.
air conditioners, all kinds of stuff that they probably all had in their garages. All of a sudden, we had a whole house. We had beds for everybody. We got 2 dinette sets that by putting them end to end was enough for all of us to sit
One of
around.
them was for my Aunt Tommy.
And family and relatives
Yeah.
too. So we were fixed.
We were all going to get new shoes. Or at least the boys were. I don't know if I was. It might have been the kids that were in school. And neither parent was about to take all those kids shoe shopping. So Mom had everybody drawing their foot on a piece of paper so that whoever was, I don't know, it was Mom or Dad that was going to the store, but they could just take the papers with them and get the right size. And I was playing like all my siblings were, and I remember my dad was talking and distracted, and there was lots going on, and I'm just this 4-year-old little girl, and I told Daddy to lift up his foot, and I drew it, and I messed up, and I wadded it up to throw it away, and he scooped me up off the floor and yelled at me, and I got spanked for wadding up this paper, and I opened it up in my tears and showed him that it was his, that I was just playing and I made a mistake. And then he's like, oh, well, you shouldn't be in here. Shooed me out.
We were barely getting by. We were eating a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches
And oatmeal.
and oatmeal. Yeah.
I'd buy Hamburger Helper, and you get the package of Hamburger Helper, and you take 1 pound of hamburger and 1 box of Hamburger Helper. Hamburger Helper sometimes would be on sale, so it would be 1 pound of hamburger to 2 or 3 boxes of Hamburger Helper. But we stretched it.
Mom struggles with anxiety, if you will. I remember her telling me a story about going into a grocery store that was unfamiliar and new, and she didn't know where the bread was. And she had already been shopping. She had a cart full of stuff. And rather than asking somebody, I don't even know if it was like a little panic attack or what. She left her cart. She left. She didn't know where to find the bread. And she was uncomfortable and felt out of place and just went home. So I can't imagine like coming from your home in Illinois where you're surrounded by old friends and family, and then coming out to this new place where your husband doesn't even have a job, and now he's trying to get you to work outside your home, which is not something that was ever in your vision.
The first one to get a job was Alan, the oldest boy. He got a job at McClellan Air Force Base, had a program to hire kids, an intern kind of program, and they give preference to kids from needy families. And so he got a job first off. And then I was going around looking for work, and I went around to the employment agencies, and it turned out that one of the bigger ones, Snelling and Snelling, I guess they're probably still in business today. But yeah, so they hired me at the employment agency. So while I was working there, one of the first things I did was get a job for Barb.
Mom was opposed to getting a job. She was happy being at home. She was happy being a wife. She was happy being a mother. Though she hated working outside the home, she was good at it.
I was working
at ServPro.
At ServPro, and they had a house that had a pool, and they didn't want the liability of the swimming pool. And so we were interested in the swimming pool and the house. We saw it, liked it, and we had not sold our house in Illinois yet. And so they sold us the house and took 2 loans. One at $4,000, no interest, no payments until we sold the house. The second one was no interest and $50 a month payments that they took out of my $350 a month salary.
And after 4 or 5 months, we moved into a house with a swimming pool and palm trees. 3 days before I turned 13.
So we bought a house with a swimming pool with no money. They carried the whole thing.
And so they were very, very nice. It helped them get rid of the property that was a liability for them and gave us a nice home.
And we had 7 little kids that loved that pool, and all their friends loved that pool. We knew where all their friends and them were all the time because they were in the pool. The first year we had the heater on, I think, for 12 months, so they used that pool all 12 months.
We all felt like we had really moved uptown. We had a house in California with palm trees and a swimming pool.
What I remember is like, and I made Mom feel bad, and I don't want to make Mom feel bad, but I had a mommy at home till I was 10 years old, and then we moved to California, and some parts I blamed on California, but she went to work, and so now, like I said, and part of it was just our age. I came home and I had an older brother that was a butt, and he would, you know, I mean, one time he gave me a bloody nose, and I tried to let it keep bleeding till Mom and Dad get home so he'd get in trouble, but it never worked because then he just said, well, you got me in trouble. So it was worse the next day, and it was just, I missed having my mom home. I thought that was, you know, it would have been all better had, you know, had that been the case, had she not gone to work and she'd been home.
They both ended up working for wine stocks. Dad was in the management department, I think, behind the scenes of wine stocks. Mom was manager, but she might have been department head, department store manager. I remember getting my clothes from wine stocks when I was a little girl.
I worked part-time over Christmas and holidays during back-to-school sales and stuff. And during one of the Christmas that I worked in children and infants department, the manager of the department then requested that I stay on full-time after the holiday season. And then I went as a manager trainee in the women's better dresses. And then I got my own department, children and infants department, and worked there for a while.
Carter's underwear from Weinstock's was my favorite underwear. And I remember my mom bringing it home to me.
Then after school started, moved to Rancho Cordova. I didn't. I stayed with Grandma and Grandpa and finished my last 2 years of high school at Highlands. Partly because I had already started high school and I didn't want to change high schools again. Partly to help Grandma because Grandpa was getting worse. I remember the day I was called out of class. And told to go home. I was needed at home.
He was only in his 60s. He wasn't that old. In my lifetime, when I knew him, he was always very frail and thin. But we moved out from Illinois when I was 4, and he was sick at that time, and when I was 6, he had passed away. So he was sick the entire time that I have memory that I knew him. So he's frail and thin, but pictures and Mom saying prove. In fact, I remember looking at a picture one time of an old man in a chair at Grandma's house, and I said, "Who's that?" But he was chubby and full and healthy, and she said, "That's Grandpa. That's my dad." And he didn't even look the same to me, because it wasn't the Grandpa I knew.
The school was just walking distance from Grandma's house, and Uncle Chuck met me at the door. And told me Grandpa was gone. He was buried a few days later on my 18th birthday.
Uncle Chuck's wife, Lisa, at the time, was the one sitting holding his hand as he passed. And that's about it.
He lived 2 years and 2 months after he was diagnosed the second time. After Earl worked at Weinstock's for a while, a friend of his encouraged him to go to work for the state, to apply for the state. And so he worked for the state and encouraged me also to apply. I was very reluctant to do it because I'm not a very outgoing person. Some of these things were very hard for me to do. But then I went to work for the state also. And I started out in the Department of Forestry in their fire protection section. From there, I got into accounting. And when my boss moved to a job in food and agriculture, they had an opening come up, and he called me and asked if I would come and interview for the opening there.
And Mom went up through the ranks. She was good at math. She was good with people. She was good with tasks that were given to her. I got a little more outgoing, and whenever there were openings, I would take the tests and I would apply for jobs. And there was an opening in the Department of General Services. I was interviewed by 3 people for 45 minutes, but I did get the job. They both went back to school, so they both got AA degrees, because a 2-year degree working for the state was a higher pay grade. And they took all the little tests and jumped through all the hoops that they could and worked up through the ranks. So they both, they went to school part-time, working full-time, and raising 7 kids. I would get overwhelmed with the kids, the housework. I never enjoyed housework. Laundry, it seemed like laundry was just unending.
She couldn't come to church because she had to do laundry. And I thought it was odd because, you know, you throw it in the washer and then later you move it to the dryer and, you know. I'm not sure when I figured this out, but you know, she just wanted the time alone. That was one couple of hours where he took all the kids to church and the house was quiet. And she could just have, that just didn't happen a lot when you have 9 people and a dog in the house. It just is always loud. So I understand that.
I do remember Mom being out with a bad back for about 2 weeks. Because I remember coming home for lunch. That was the coolest thing ever. I got to come home for lunch and nobody else was home. It was just my mom and me.
There was never any fear of divorce or separation. I mean, it just never crossed anybody's mind. I mean, I know of us kids that I know of. I mean, you know, they had ups and downs, and
They fought a lot. You know, they shouted, they yelled. I don't think I ever remember in all of that them calling each other names. I don't remember that. I can't remember them. I certainly don't remember them using derogatory language to each other ever. You know, calling them things that you shouldn't. You know, that kind of thing. I don't remember that. They taught me that it's okay to fight and then make up. But I know they had struggles.
I've always suspected that my dad may not have been faithful all the time. I remember borrowing a suitcase from him because when he worked, he'd be out of town. He'd have to travel a little bit with his job for the state. And I used a suitcase, and in the suitcase I found a name and a number. And I asked him about it, and he got very upset and told me I shouldn't be meddling in anybody else's business.
And there was a time Dad was out of town working for several months, I think, at least in Los Angeles while we were in Sacramento, in Rancho Cordova, and I knew Mom took that real hard. I remember sitting at the table with a bottle of wine, drinking wine and crying.
Me and my twin brother were 15 years old, or approaching 15 years old, and during that time my dad was on an extended work assignment in Southern California while we lived in Northern California. And I seem to recall it was like 3/4 of the year or something, like 7 months that he was gone. And so my mom was left with the little kids and being the disciplinarian as well as the nurturer, playing roles that she had traditionally not necessarily played. And that was really tough for her. And she handled it well from my perspective, but I seem to recall that we almost put her, probably me and my twin brother, almost put her into the nut house just ourselves. But it ended and everything was fine, so any thoughts or rumors, I didn't detect much, except that Mom got a lot meaner during that period when she was responsible for discipline. It's interesting because Dad, after that time, when we turned 15, we actually went to Southern California with Mom. First time I'd ever been on an airplane, and me and my twin brother and my mom and dad spent 3 days in Southern California in LA together, and that was really fun. But I recall that when my dad returned back home permanently again from that assignment, I don't know any of the details behind it, but that changed the dynamic between my twin brother and I and my parents, because now, whereas my mom had always been the softie, never would raise a hand against us, Dad always did that, now I found my mom spanking us or my mom disciplining us even after my dad was home. And now I found that my dad was the one I could go to and say, hey, can I go to so-and-so's house? And he would say yes. So it didn't completely flip-flop it, but it evened it out. And now it wasn't Dad was the mean one and Mom was the nice one. And that was after that period.
There was a few times when I would be out and I'd think, what if I just kept driving?
I could just keep driving. I could just leave. But, she said,
And then I thought of Earl, and I thought of the kids, and I thought of the years ahead of them, the potential grandchildren, and nah.
that's what kept her from leaving. So she says.
We had I think it was a Thanksgiving Day meal where we put tables together and had a large gathering. And a friend had brought over a tarantula in a jar. And my mother is so terrified of tarantulas. She didn't want it in the house. But when we were in a bedroom, the garage was made into part of the house. We were in the garage portion of the house, and we were going to take the spider out and let somebody hold it. And she wasn't even in the part of the house, but she left and went in the backyard and yelled to get that thing back in the jar. She wasn't going to come back in the house till it was in the jar. So we had to put it back in the jar so she could come in, and she needed to be in because she was cooking and stuff was on the stove just boiling over or whatever, but she was not coming in until that thing was back in the jar. That's how afraid of the spider she was. Well, my brother Matt, or Gary Matt, he decided that
he would be funny, and so he got some other container and put the spider in it and then knocked the jar over with the lid off. And Brian didn't know anything about this trick, joke.
So when the people who owned the spider were leaving the house for the night and they were done eating and most of us were still there, they got up and they went to get their spider. They said, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" Because they didn't know.
And so he just came in Brian's fashion, "What happened to my spider?" And Mom about had a heart attack. And so Matt was like, "It's okay, I got it. I put it in another jar," and just had to calm her down.
He almost immediately jumped up and put his hand on my mom's arm and said, "Mom, I'm just joking. It's in the other room. It's okay." And his response to that was he had never seen her go so white so fast, and he was scared that he may have actually killed her.
That's a funny thing, but it's not necessarily smart to do to someone who's older.
So he's probably the one that's caused the most stress in our lives, one way or another.
It was my second vehicle. I had a car, and while I was at work, at 10 o'clock we finalized the deal. I traded my car and $400 for this little Ford Courier, an old vehicle. So like I said, it's 10 o'clock at night. The guy I bought it from never wore seatbelts. I always wore seatbelts. To this day, I'm just comfortable wearing seatbelts. But he didn't wear them. They're crammed under behind the seats and everything, all grimy. And it's 10 o'clock at night. I hadn't pulled the seatbelts out yet. And basically, I have this vehicle for less than 14 hours. I drove home. The next day, I'm driving it for the first time, and me and a buddy of mine, Rick Miller, don't know where we went, but now we're driving down Folsom Boulevard, and we're in, of two lanes going our way, we're in the slow lane, and somebody pulls out of a gas station right in front of me. So I swerve into the left lane, and I'm 17 probably. Maybe 18. I'm not an experienced driver. But anyway, he pulls in front of me, so I swerve into the next lane, and apparently he realized what he did, so he moves over to the left lane thinking he's getting out of my way. So I move back into the right lane, and he sees me behind him, so he moves back into the right lane, and it's a mess, so I'm going to hit him. So I try pulling into the gas station that he pulled out of, and I'm probably doing 40 or 45. And there's fields, everything's fine, except the only thing in front of me is a light pole that is set on a 2-foot square cement block. And we hit that doing about 45 with no seatbelts.
His mouth hit the steering wheel and knocked teeth out, bleeding really bad. The bottom half of the steering wheel hit his stomach to where he couldn't breathe. And And seeing the blood and not breathing, he just thought he was dead, yeah.
So I'm sure my guts are hanging out. But all it was a little cut to my lip and a cut on the back of my hand that caused the blood, and of course I just had the wind knocked out of me. He hit the windshield, was knocked unconscious, and had a mat of hair stuck in the windshield. I mean, it was, you know, who knows? A few more miles per hour, who knows what would have happened. Then he asked me what happened, and I told him we got in an accident. And he opens the car door, takes 2 steps, boom, goes down again, hits the pavement. So anyway, you know, the gas station attendant comes up.
Opened the door or looked in and says, "Oh my God!" That's what you want to hear when you're laying there bleeding. Oh.
All of a sudden, my stomach starts turning, my head starts spinning because I think I probably was going into shock from my initial thoughts that I was really hurt. So, you know, really wasn't that big of a deal. The truck was totaled, and the insurance company gave me $400 more than my transaction. So in 14 hours, I made $400 on the deal. But because I was 18, there's no requirement for the hospital to call anybody.
And I came home from work, and I got a phone call, and one of his buddy's mothers asked me how Gary was doing.
We didn't even know.
And you knew because they had called you, and you had gone to the hospital. And
Man,
I didn't know what
that.
was going on. So I called the hospital, and they couldn't find, they said he'd been released or something, and it was shortly after that then you and Gary walked in.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to know why in the world you didn't call me, and I was falling apart, you know. Here's my kid.
Her baby covered with blood, then yeah, she had another breakdown, you know, I mean, which any mother would, and it was just, gosh.
Arm bandaged and face.
His teeth are still messed up today from that.
And blood all over his clothes.
And yeah, she had a breakdown.
And they says, that's why we didn't call you.
I don't remember Dad's reaction. But from other instances in my life, I think he probably rolled with it pretty well. But you know, no, Mom, that was, you know, that probably shaved a year or 2 off of her life. And I've done that a few times over the course of my life.
He had a series of vehicle accidents, all of them critical.
If he owned it, he crashed it.
It's not so much an inexperienced driver, it's just a real bad driver. I don't know that I've even outgrown that.
He had
Then
a little...
he bought a new little truck. It's a little $4,000 truck that he had bought. Within 15 months, he did over $5,000 worth of damage to that little truck.
And the vehicle did not get totaled because it lived on to get in 3 or 4 more crashes.
He and his buddies were going to go someplace to go scuba diving in a little truck he had, and the scuba gear was all in the back, and it had a shell on it.
And it had rained that day, and I really wasn't aware of that, so the pavement was wet. I'm going too fast. Mountain roads, you know, curving, and it's one of these where it's, you know, it's the cliff this way, and you know the road is just built on the mountainside. And we're talking and playing music, and if I remember right, I was reaching for the radio to turn it up. Or
as he came around a corner, there was a vehicle, as I recall, it was a truck that was coming the other way, and in his attempt to get out of the way,
lost control. All of a sudden, I'm skidding, and the next thing I know, all of a sudden the mountain looms in front and into the mountain and spin around and hit this side, and it spins all the way around and hits the other side.
camper top came off.
Camping gear and scuba diving gear all over the road, down the mountainside. It's everywhere. But nobody was hurt.
He's sitting at an intersection, 2 lanes of traffic each way, turn lanes.
State trooper, I guess.
Yeah,
it was.
highway patrolman was on the other side on the stop.
And Gary was going to make a turn, and the cop motioned him to go ahead and make his turn.
Even though
And
it
Gary
should have
didn't.
been the cop go first, but the cop motioned him to go ahead.
And he got through 3 of the 4 lanes.
And he got hit and spun around in the intersection.
But now he's facing the highway patrolman again, who has his head in his hands, shaking his head like this.
And then he had his little ambulance-looking RV.
Yeah.
What were those called?
It was a truck kind of van, closed in. It was an odd-looking vehicle, but
Dolphin?
Dolphin, yeah. Yeah,
Toyota.
Toyota Dolphin, yeah. I think he had the one of only two in the whole state of California, probably.
Still driving to work. I'm on Interstate 80, 4-lane highway, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I do notice somebody 3 lanes over who was was merging onto another freeway, off ramp onto another freeway, and they had a problem and slammed on brakes, tires smoking, and I see her coming my way.
Shot across the freeway, caught the back end of that little Dolphin and flipped it upside down, and he's now sliding upside down the freeway.
I don't know which end is up.
He had a spare tire in the back of there.
And a bowling ball.
And a bowling ball.
So there was a case of empty Lowenbrau bottles back there.
Sliding down the road with all this stuff flying around.
Came to rest upside down, hanging from the seat.
And there again, he didn't even, I don't think he got even hurt there.
He doesn't have any more trucks, does he?
He has, he just got a brand new one, yeah.
Even the truck he has now, he may have dinged that a little bit.
Yeah, he wrecked this brand new one. He didn't even, I don't think he had his license. No, he didn't have his license plates on it yet. It just only had it a day or two.
It's a miracle he's still alive.
I was in high school, and again, Mom and Dad are working full-time, going to school, raising 7 kids. They probably didn't even hardly see each other except for passing, and when they did, they were exhausted. I've often said to friends that through my growing up, I'm totally a daddy's girl, love my daddy, he's a great daddy, but I'm not sure I'd ever want to be his wife. There's just things he says and attitudes that he has had over the years and in the past that weren't thoughtful to his wife. I think that Dad has the tendency to see everybody on the same page, and everybody should feel like he feels, and everybody should have the practical mindset that he has and the common sense that he has, and nobody should have any different thoughts or views or feelings, including his wife, whether you're male or female. I think you've finally learned that. Now it's different. I think having daughters and granddaughters have helped, but it was hard on Mom to always, suck it up and be brave and do what has to be done. He lacked a little bit of compassion, if you will, for her perspective. I don't think he even could comprehend her perspective. So it's hard. Life was hard.
The first time, when Dad worked for the state, my dad worked for the state of California, and quite often was out of town. I believe up to 5 or 6 weeks sometimes. And I remember the first time Mom went out of town for a week or two, also working for the state. And Dad was home alone. For the first time, had been left behind. And I was managing a restaurant at nights, and he comes walking into the restaurant because he was lonely and depressed. It was the first time I ever heard my dad say he was depressed. And so Mom was gone. He was trying to think of one of his kids he could go visit. And everybody was busy, but he knew I was at work, so I was a captive audience. And that was the first time I realized that Dad won't make it without Mom. But yeah, I don't really recall any time that I genuinely thought there might be no future between the two of them.
Well, it was the time when we were still on the farm when she caught me out with the sheep.
Oh, sheep! Shame on you. That will be edited out, I hope.
And I just know, again, from my perspective, I might have been junior high, high school, 9th, 10th grade, right around there. Her sister, our Aunt Connie, just lived a half hour away, and they were relatively close. And Aunt Connie's daughter Lynette and myself are close. We were then as well. We're only 4 months apart in age, and we were friends. We're still friends, and so we talked a lot. My mom was spending a lot of time over at Aunt Connie's. There was a period. A lot of time over at Aunt Connie's. And I could tell vibes, something's wrong. I remember my dad coming home from work one day. I don't think anybody was home except for me. The house was definitely really quiet. And and dark. And I remember Dad sitting in the rocking chair that looked out the sliding glass door where you could see the pool in the backyard, and he was just sitting in that chair staring outside. And he had, I wish I could remember what song, but it was Waylon Jennings or somebody that was playing on the radio, on the record. He had a record on. He specifically put a record on. And he was just quiet. Mom wasn't home. Don't know where she was. But he was clearly sad to me. So I called Lynette because I know that my mom had been spending a lot of time over there. I know that I had seen my mother on the phone crying a lot to Aunt Connie. So I asked Lynette what was going on, what had she heard, what's happening. I know that you hear stuff. I had to beg. And she said, well, let me come over. And I said, no, I don't want to wait till you come over. Just tell me. What do you know?
They've had their times, but they've stuck it out.
I don't know what exactly was happening. I don't know any of the details. I just know that hit me hard, scared me, panicked me. And obviously, it was hitting my dad. I don't know what exactly was going on. I know that a short time after that, I can't remember if it was days or weeks, but I remember the two of them sitting out in the backyard on the swing that we had out there. Both of them crying, both of them talking. None of us kids going out there. I kept watching out the window, mind you. Kept peeking. I remember that. And it seemed like that was it. They made decisions together. They talked about stuff together. Maybe they forgave together. But it seemed, whatever was happening seemed to go away after that point. It doesn't mean that everything was perfect after that, by any means. But the darkness that was there, that was kind of hovering over, like I said, I don't know details. I can only speculate. But that seemed to be a very important discussion between the two of them. And that's about all the icky details I have. I think because I didn't want to know anymore. I don't think I asked. I don't think I discussed it with siblings. I don't think I wanted to know. It was too scary.
And I know that they love each other.
9 years with the state. And they contacted me and they offered me the job, and they wanted to know how much I wanted. So I told them how much I wanted, and I thought, they're never going to hire me because they're not going to pay me that much money. They answered too quickly that yes, and they also paid for paid an auto allowance. It was an enjoyable job. It was good pay, and like I said, during the time I was with them, which was about 8 years, I was earning a little more money than Earl.
When we were working downtown and commuting, riding together, we came home from work to our house in Rancho Cordova, and did we even go in the house?
We didn't get in the house. Brian came out the door.
It was full of kids, noise.
He says, "Be quiet. There's 10 people in there and they're watching a movie."
So we just got back in the car and went to a motel in Rancho and didn't even come home that night.
And the next week we went looking for another house, smaller house. But it got to be, I just got fed up with working, and I had some grandchildren, and I wanted to spend some time with my grandchildren. And he about had a stroke when I told him I wanted to quit work.
She got me used to living at a style that I was accustomed to, and I didn't think we would be able to do it without her income.
But I phased it down because the last year that I did work, I was only working 3 days a week. But even a year working at the reduced salary and the reduced days, it still wasn't enough for me. I wanted to be home. I had never wanted to work away from home. And so finally he allowed me to retire. And my boss, when I put in my resignation, my boss got down on his knees and begged me to stay, and that was really a good feeling too.
I think they offered to let her work from home. I think they offered to buy her home office furniture, and I think they told her that she could name her own salary. But she was done working.
She was the first one to retire from that company, so they threw a big retirement party for her.
Mm-hmm.
But even after that, they called her back every time they had a conference or a seminar or a convention. They called her back to work, which she kind of enjoyed that part.
Yeah, and I did that for about 5 or 6 years after I quit. So.
When the kids were little, I had my dad. I don't know where Mom was, but he watched my oldest as a baby, and and Christopher, he was on a schedule where he just had his bowel movement like every other day. But for some reason, when Dad had him, he had like 3 poopy diapers. That did not go over well, because I got home and he said, "I never change my kids' diapers." God darn it, and I'm not changing grandkids. I think he had to change it.
He's been a good example. Most of the time. And a lot of times, he's been a good example of what not to do or how to act. It was, I know our little sister laughed in his face one time when she said something about a temper, and Dad shook his head and said, "Yeah, you guys get that from your mom."
On this trip, my mom has been sick, and he is just, he just is doing a great job. He does laundry now. He cleans the kitchen. I mean, he was telling me a couple nights ago that, it's only fair because, she did it so many years. So, it's his turn. And I don't know if he was thinking he was getting close. I said, no. But she did it for 9 people. I said, "You're doing it for 2 of you. So you got a lot." And he just laughed. He knows he's got a lot of years. But I was telling my husband to take notes. and my mom said, "Oh no, honey, this took like 50 years of training." So I don't know if it'll ever happen for me.
She's lost a child. She's lost a grandchild. And she's lost a great-grandchild. She's lost both of her parents. She's lost both of her sisters. She lost one of her brothers. She's gone through a lot of stuff in her life. And she's had to put up with our dad for over 60 years.
She wasn't too crazy about going to work. She wanted to be a full-time housewife. She wasn't too crazy about going back to school, but she did, and she got her degree and got a great job and made a lot of money, and and made more money than me, and she's the reason that we can retire and not work now. She's happy just supervising me now.
That's
It's all relative as far as, how good is life. But I think the opportunities that we have all had because we didn't stay in Pakistan have been huge.
Paxton's broom factory closed down, and that was a lot of jobs lost. The theater where they met is not an active theater anymore. The sign is still there, but it's got, a couple picnic tables in the space where people can have their lunch. It hasn't grown. Paxton, Illinois is still just a little tiny town. Middle America, it's good, but, I think Mom and Dad wanted something bigger for us.
So his choice to pack up the family and sell everything and move to California was moving further away from his family and closer to his in-laws. So I don't know that it was a selfish reason, but I think it's given all of us a better life.
So the move to California was just great. It sure turned out for the best.
best thing that ever happened.
Our kids' lives have been way better than they would be working on a hog farm in Illinois, is what they all would be doing.
Or detasseling corn or something like
I
that.
don't know if they even do that
They
anymore.
probably
but
don't.
Yeah.
For them, in my eyes, retiring, moving into this house, which was a huge deal for me, downsizing, the kids were grown, the kids were on their own, we can take a breath, we can take a break. And yeah, it was a good deal.
They were young enough when they had all us kids that when we were then old enough, they got to go, they got to travel, they got to see people and places. They went around the country, but they reconnected with a lot of relatives that they hadn't seen and spend a lot of time, they just did a lot of really cool things together.
Up until last summer for 13, 14 years, every summer Mom and Dad came up and lived with me for 2 to 3 months of the summer, and it was awesome.
They came up to Alaska every summer for a lot of summers, and they brought, one grandkid with them. Almost, not every time I don't think, but almost every time they'd bring a grandkid with them, which was an incredibly special time, I think, for that, one kid, and they could come up and do that, and it's just been really neat. And even now, they don't drive as much, but they still, they still take their trips, and they have times, and they are together, and they're doing really good, and it's really neat to see. They're just a neat couple. I love my mom and dad, and they're doing really, really good. I hope we do as good.
They still fight and argue, and and I've been in the car with them, but my kids would make trips to Alaska with them, and and they go at it. They just always go at it. They get over it pretty quick.
It's impressive. I mean, I feel kind of bad for Mom and Dad. Here they've 57 years of marriage, and they have 7 kids, and only one of them has found the secret of successful marriage, and that's me, because I'm the only one that's never been married. Although most of my siblings are happily married now. And only one of their children had a large family with 5 kids. And I've had Mom and Dad, express to me that they wondered if they did something wrong with, having a big family. They always assumed that their kids would all have big families. So, who knows what's going on there? It's a different economy, different times, and not everybody's stupid enough to have 7 or 8 kids.
I like my siblings, and I think that's a testimony to them. I hear too many families that are in distress or haven't spoken to a sibling for years, and I don't feel that we're that way. The last 2 times that we've actually gotten together as a family, I think we've all had fun. We've all enjoyed it. And it's just simply being a family. The crap along with the good, but laughing and playing games and no puzzles.
They, and it is phenomenal that they raised 7 kids. And even though we're spread around a little now, all the way from Alaska to, the 4 corners of the country, from California to Washington, D.C., from Texas to Alaska, we have an extremely close family that love each other.
I do remember my dad trying to make time to do things with us. Very seldom playing a game with us. He wasn't big into games. I was always understood or perceived, but I remember him playing a game with us. I remember when I was in elementary school or perhaps junior high school, my dad going on a bike ride with us, telling me and me and my twin brother, and saying, let's go on a bike ride. I didn't really want to, but he couldn't say no to Dad, and he was wanting to do something with us. I look back on it, having only 2 kids myself, and I see, wow, would I go out of my way to get off my recliner and try to go do something with 2 of my 7 kids instead of let them just play with themselves? And it just really impacts me that he would have made those kinds of efforts when it was so easy to just let momentum go and let the kids raise themselves. So I've always thought that was a neat thing.
I just can't see. I respect my parents so much more having 5 kids. Now thinking of what they did with 7 kids, they did a lot. Did a lot.
What do you think their secret is?
I don't know.
I think they know.
Stubbornness. I don't think they know either. They're both stubborn.
They raised 5 Eagle Boy Scouts, which is phenomenal. It's just incredible. And they raised 7 God-fearing, God-loving children. It's just amazing what they did. And I love you, Mom and Dad.
The last thing is, I have, as I've grown up, going to church, participating in Sunday school, teaching Sunday school sometimes to younger kids, participating in adult Bible studies and whatnot, I've frequently been able to give lessons or draw analogies or anecdotes, realizing that my whole concept of who God is, the loving Father, as imperfect as my dad is, my mom is, my understanding of God, both as disciplinarian, as loving, his protecting, all that comes from my mom and dad. And I just feel sorry for people who don't have a relationship with their parents. And I realize, how can a world live and know God if they don't have loving parents?
I think that they have been a less than perfect fantastic 100% example of parents and a marriage. I couldn't have asked for a more committed set of parents to each other and to us kids. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that my dad loves my mom. And I know that my mom loves her family, loves Dad. I know that Dad has been proud to provide and to be a strength in this family. I don't think he's ever had a dream job or something big. I think he wanted to provide for his wife and his children, and he's done that. And that's it. I'm proud of my parents. I'm proud of their marriage. I'm proud of the 60 years.
And I don't know which one's going to go first, but the other one is going to be hurting.
The good has far outweighed the bad, but it's been a good life. And if I had to do it over again, I'd do it the same.
Oh, I would marry Marilyn Monroe the next round if I had it to do
Yeah.
over again.
Yeah, yeah.